Okay, so here's a quiz. What holiday is Monday? Well, if you said Columbus Day, you're wrong. At least if you live in Seattle, the city voting this week to rename Columbus Day Indigenous Peoples Day. Now, Wayne, Minneapolis did this earlier this year. What's going on with the PC police?
Well, this is political correctness going berserk, Eric. I mean,
Columbus wasn't particularly a nice person. Columbus sort of stumbled across this place that was full of sophisticated societies. It wasn't a vacant land. It wasn't a virgin land. They didn't leave the first imprint of humanity. Humanity had been here for thousands of years. And his treatment of Native Americans was less than Christian, you know. And some of those stories of the enslavement, the rape, right, some of the massacres that had taken place on the Caribbean islands, they were rarely ever mentioned. Before Columbus Day, there was some recognition that Italians actually were part of America's national history, but in a limited way. You have to realize that many Italians weren't considered white when they first came over to this country. And in places like New Orleans, for example, many Italians were working in sort of with side by side with African Americans, sometimes intermarrying with African Americans. And in the South, oftentimes they were treated in the same derogatory way that African Americans were, and they were oftentimes lynched. There were horrific examples of public lynchings in New Orleans, for example, of Italian Americans. This horrified Benjamin Harrison, so he decided to make it a holiday in the 1890s. Later, it became a national holiday. It became an entry point for many Italian Americans to become part of America's story.
Where we used our literacy and knowledge to advocate for our people.
The idea originally came from a former city councilor, Nadine Mazin, who put a policy order in. Unfortunately, he didn't do a lot of legwork first, so it became very controversial and very heated, so we kind of pulled it back a little bit. And I started to get involved and brought in some folks from the Italian community in Cambridge to sort of talk about this, because they saw this as a slight against Italian heritage. I think a lot of people, what we heard from a lot of people is that it wasn't so much about celebrating Columbus as much as they saw it as a celebration of Italian Americans. And so we had to kind of talk about that and sort of get through that, which we did. And it wasn't, we still didn't get universal support. But then when we had moved this forward a little bit more in the community, then I refiled the policy order myself to change Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day.
What do you think is stopping lawmakers from changing this holiday, changing the name of this holiday?
It's controversial. You know, I mean, anytime you want to change a tradition, you run a risk. And some of us are willing to take that risk. Some are not.
what we do is work to provide them the educational supports that are needed, such as tutoring, STEM program, arts and cultural programming that also address their feeling of wholeness and identity, and then work with them to put them into career paths that are going to benefit not just them and their families, but again, as a community, bring us forward. So National Native American Heritage Month is important for a few reasons. It raises awareness to community members and the general public that Native people are still present, that our histories and our contributions are relevant and that they should be celebrated. So Thanksgiving is a difficult day to talk about. Its history is actually quite morbid, and it was always hard to celebrate or be asked to celebrate it growing up, because it started as a celebration that Indian people were killed.
"14 years ago, the Boston Indian Imprisonment Act was repealed, finally, meaning that it was legal now for American Indians to walk the streets of Boston unescorted, starting in 2005. The figure that's on the flag, first of all, they took the head of Chief Thomas Littleshell from the Ojibwe. They took his head, saying, okay, this is a guy that looks Indian enough. They took a skeleton that was excavated in an archaeological dig, saying, okay, well, these are the proportions of Native people indigenous to Massachusetts. And then the sash that the figure wears is actually modeled off of King Philip's sash.
One of the first times I realized that I was facing prejudice in the classroom was when I was a little girl. It must have been 3rd grade. And it was during, it was right before Christopher Columbus Day. So my elementary school celebrated Christopher Columbus for an entire week leading up to the holiday. And I informed my teacher that my family had taught me differently, and that he was no hero, that he in fact participated in slavery, genocide, and rape. And I was sent to the principal's office and asked to apologize both to the teacher and my classmates.
Teacher had us line up by race. She had white students line up first, then Asians, then African Americans, and then Native Americans were at the back of the line. As I got older, I looked back on that and I just thought, like, wow, that's just terrible that she was, trying to say that my people were at the, back of the line, we're at the bottom of the pyramid, so to speak. And it just really, even that day, I remember, like, it kind of made me feel like, I guess like I'm less than the other students in my class.
I would like Boston to remember that Native people are here, that we are your neighbors, your educators, your fellow students, your bus drivers, your attorneys. We are very much here.
I want them to know that we're still here.
We are here.
The thing is, culture should evolve. And we're seeing this a lot in all kinds of movements that are happening, around the country. And things that were acceptable 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago are not acceptable anymore. And that's how it should be, right? Instead of looking at that as, oh, you're trying to change everything and you're trying to take things away, it's really about an evolution. And that's what culture is supposed to do. We don't want to be stuck. thinking the way we did 100 years ago.
We are the tribe that they cannot see. We live on an industrial reservation. We are the Halusa Nation. We have been called the Indians. We have been called Native American. We have been called hostile. We have been called pagan. We have been called militant. We have been called many names. We are the Halusa Nation. We are the human beings. The callers of names cannot see us, but we can see them.